Israel to exploit these attacks to seek advantage. The world is watching.
Well, joining us now is Ravi Agrawal, Editor-in-Chief of Foreign Policy. Welcome to you, Ravi. Great to have you back with us. Once again, I want to just update you and, of course, our viewers on some new details that we are getting. We're learning that hostages who were being held in the southern town of Ofakim, they have been rescued. That's according to Israel's public broadcaster Khan. 3 Israeli soldiers were moderately and lightly wounded. That's according to the broadcaster posting there on X, formerly known as Twitter. Now, it also added that Hamas attackers had been killed. I mean, Ravi, with all of this in mind, talking this evening, I just want to begin by getting your reaction to what we've been seeing.
Gosh, well, I mean, the hostages massively complicate this situation because obviously in the Israeli psyche, hostages are extremely important. Every Israeli life is really important. And they have been known in the past to, in releasing Israeli hostages to give up a lot in return. A few years ago, when an Israeli called Gilad Shalit was released by Hamas, that was in return for 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. So the fact that there are so many other hostages who are still being used essentially as human shields now by Hamas in Gaza, since they've taken them back there, that massively complicates the situation for Israel as it looks to deliver a response, a proportionate response or a disproportionate response that we're likely to see in the coming days. And this really just is a huge, huge attack that has taken place today that I think has shocked Israelis, that has shocked the world. And it was a surprise in many senses, because this is a massive intelligence failure for Hamas to be able to conduct such an attack by land, air, and sea, despite having a fraction of the resources that Israel has at its disposal.
And Ravi, touching on this unprecedented scale of the attack, as you've just been alluding to, we're also getting more details coming into us now from the New York Times, essentially reporting that we've got air raid sirens, which are continuing early on Sunday morning in Israel, warnings going off in the coastal city of Ashkelon at about 2:30 a.m. I mean, just talking about this scale and what we are seeing and what we've seen essentially on what is day one, how do you see this developing?
I mean, day one is a very apt way of putting it, Helena, because this is going to go on for a while. It is very clear now that Hamas must have been planning this for months. It isn't over on Hamas's part. There are still scattered fighters who have infiltrated by ground or by paragliders into Israeli towns. They're still active. Israel is obviously trying to shut those attackers down. But then, we sort of move into the response phase, and there will be a lot of pressure internally on Israel to launch a huge response. We've heard the phrase that this is Israel's 9/11 being invoked again and again today. And that gives you a sense of how much of a blow this is to Israel. But it also gives you a sense of what to expect in the coming days. 9/11 was obviously an awful, awful attack on America, but then it led to a series of attacks and a war on terror that lasted for the better part of 20 years. Similarly, now that we're invoking 9/11, you can expect Israel to have a massive response that will have a range of regional effects. This is not going to be just about Gaza. Questions will be asked about who supported Hamas, which other regional powers, whether it's Iran. We may yet see the involvement of Hezbollah and other regional groups, and all of that will have an impact on other regional deals, such as the Saudi-Israeli move to try and normalize ties between the two countries.
And I do want to ask you about that with your international perspective, Ravi, in terms of why now? As you point out, coming at a time when there was this closening of ties, the possibility for this peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel, do you think that could have played a role, or was this also a symptom of the fact that this conflict between Israel and Hamas had been so long running that essentially things were bound to boil over at some point?
I think it's a bit of all of that. all we can do is try and assess in hindsight the potential Israeli-Saudi normalization of ties. One of the things that was on the table was America trying to pressure Israel to make concessions towards the Palestinians. All of that now is gone. But clearly, in even those talks of concessions, the Palestinians weren't consulted. This could be Hamas's way of saying, wait a minute, we don't like what's going on, and we want a say. We want to sort of attack in this very brutal, horrific way. But it's not just that. This attack hasn't come in a vacuum, and we can say that now in hindsight. There's been a lot of violence in the West Bank, that other Palestinian territory nearby, over the course of this year. Some of the worst violence that we've seen, skirmishes in years. We also have one of Israel's most right-wing governments in recent history. That too has come with its own set of complications. A top Israeli minister recently visited what Israelis call the Temple Mount, their holiest site, what Muslims call the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That is another thing that has raised tensions in recent weeks. All of that, when you put all of that together, and the fact that America has largely been distracted to a degree by the war in Ukraine, and also with competition with China, you put all of that together, and Hamas may have just found a moment to attack and to surprise Israel and the world.
Ravi, we are learning that US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been speaking to Turkey, has been speaking to partners in the European Union. What do you think that says?
What it says is that the United States is going to try and build a coalition of support right now. I think, a lot of these countries, not Turkey, but other ones, see Hamas as a terrorist group, the European Union as well. I think they're all going to look to try and back Israel in any way that it needs. I mean, there have been a lot of problems in Israeli-US relations recently. There have been problems internally within Israel, a lot of dissent, a lot of anger at Prime Minister Netanyahu. But in a moment like this, when Israel's security is threatened, when its existence is threatened by a group which doesn't even recognize Israel, to be clear, all of that then ends up uniting all of these various groups, whether it's groups within Israel, whether it's the larger West, as we like to call it, and allies of the United States, I think will all come together in some way to try and assist Israel in the here and now, to try and see what kinds of solutions can be looked at in the coming months, and to ensure that the violence that we will undoubtedly see in the coming weeks doesn't get too bad. This is a really, really messy, murky situation. It is, as Prime Minister Netanyahu has called it, war.
But I do just want to, as you say, it's a messy situation, thread another crisis into the mix here, and that is Ukraine. And I just wonder how you see all of this playing out internationally at a time when, as you've pointed out, Western attention is very much focused on Russia's war on Ukraine.
It is several crises all at once. At a global level, the world, to be honest, cannot take it. There are too many crises going on all at once. International cooperation is at a low. Multilateralism has been struggling now for a long time. And this is one more crisis that in some senses divides the world. It divides the Middle East for sure. But there are many countries in the global south that are quite resentful for the amount of attention that Ukraine has gotten. They will also be divided by this issue as well. If you think about Muslim countries around the world, which have long tried to add attention for what has been a very tough situation for the Palestinians over the last few decades. There will be more calls now for support for the Palestinian people among people who support their cause. And it's a cause, we should remind ourselves, that has been backburnered now for years. As much as this, what we're seeing today, is a failure of intelligence, it is also a failure of diplomacy. It is a failure of the international community that got us to this point, that led to us being shocked and surprised. And it's a reminder that in as much as there has been some semblance of peace, if you can call it that, over the last few years, it was a very tenuous peace that has been shattered today. And it's just one more big problem for the international community to deal with. And from the evidence we're seeing, it's not for sure that the world is equipped to handle it.
Yeah, poignant, powerful point there to end on. Ravi Agrawal, Editor-in-Chief of Foreign Policy, Great to have your perspective as always. Thanks for being with us.